Hello, welcome back to 340 Paddler, and we are on to week 12. We are probably somewhere around the end of March as you're viewing this. Obviously, if you're actually viewing it when I put it up, it's sometime in January, and I'm looking at a foot of snow outside. Not exactly the best thing to be looking at, but if you want to be like some of the top racers like Rusty and others, training is going to be important, and you are making progress at this point. You are getting closer to that goal, floating down the river and taking a picture of a big rock. Moving on, let's talk about cardio. Cardio is not going to be changing that much for most of you. From this point forward, if you're looking for, to finish, or you're looking for, say, a 60-ish hour finish, then you're probably looking at exactly the same thing and continuing it from now through the race. Now, the one thing that's going to change is as we move forward, you're still trying to progress with your runs or your bikes or your swims, going further or faster. But as you start getting into the boat, as you spend time in the boat, these cardio pieces will become recovery. So you're going to want to keep your heart rate a little bit lower as you do them, because it's really recovery, in active recovery between your paddle workouts. Remember what we're training to do. We're not training to be runners, we're training to paddle. So as we look at week 12 for anyone from finisher to about 60 hours, we're looking at the same thing we did last week. Not a lot of change, but if you are instead in the sub 50 group and you're looking for a sub 50 finish, then you are progressing. And week 12, you're looking at 2 4-mile runs and 1 6-mile run. Now you notice those runs are going to become more and more divergent. That's perfectly fine. In fact, if you wanted to, you could stall in this program, keep it at, say, a 6-miler as your long run, and for a couple of weeks, increase your mileage for the shorter runs. So you could be doing 2x5 and then 1x6, 1x7, 1x8, or 2x6. I wouldn't go beyond 6. There's really no need for it, as this is effectively cross-training. So keep that in mind. But if you are looking sub 50, you do want to increase this mileage. We also have intervals, and we talked about them a few weeks ago. I'm incorporating them more and more into the training. And you should be to the point with intervals that you're looking to improve. And improvement can be slow with intervals. So, for example, with your 2x20 minutes, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, you're going to be slowly adding about 2 minutes per set, or 1 extra sprint per set. And you would add 1 extra sprint about once a week, give or take, or once per session if you're doing 3 different pieces, that sort of thing. If you're doing 2 sets of 3x5, slowly add another 5-minute piece until you work up to 3 sets of 3x5. If you're doing mile repeats, add a 5th and eventually a 6th. If you're doing these intervals on an ergometer or a rower or something like that, remember, when you get on the water, it's going to be harder. It's almost going to be like you take a step back, and that's fine because that step back isn't nearly what it would be if you didn't do any interval training before getting on the water. And remember, be consistent. If your time starts to drop by more than 10% for any rep, then you're done for the day. And it may be less than 10%. In some cases, like 1,000 meter or a mile or something like that, it might be 5%, because over 4 minutes, 10% could be rather a lot, 30 seconds or more. So you don't really want to look at that because you'd be doing intervals all day. So pick a percentage and stick to it. When you hit that percentage, if you slow down beyond it, then you're done. You'll come back the next time. Your body will have adapted. You will do better. But there's no point in doing a quote-unquote survival interval if it's not going to hit the time goals, because the whole point of an interval is to crank your heart rate up. So if you're not going to do that, well, then you don't need to be doing the interval. So let's talk about recording your progress. As I said, intervals tend to have fairly small changes. You see differences of a second. So how do you keep track of that?
So this week, instead of doing core exercises, which I usually shoot live, I want to talk about tracking your training. And there's a couple of different things that you can do. Where I started out is I actually started by tracking my training on a calendar, and it simply lists, in this case, how many miles I've done running and paddling, or running, paddling, and on the ergometer, whatever it is. The advantage to this is, especially as you get closer to the 340, you might be sitting there going, have I trained enough? You'll see people who will post things like, oh, I've got 20,000 miles of training. And it's nice to have something in the back of your head, knowing, okay, I've done this much. Now, don't let this be misleading. Just because you have more training doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do better. There's a lot more to the 340 than that. But this sort of thing keeps me honest. It shows me days that I didn't train. It shows me trends. So, and I keep these from year to year. So I've got 2018, 2017, 2016, and I've got 2019 already. And it's just a way for me to keep track of things. Am I keeping my off day? Am I doing the training that needs to be done? Have I skipped some training? I can look real quickly and notice that I missed my run, or I missed this piece or that piece. So it is advantageous for just sort of keeping track of what you've done so far. I also love the feeling of actually writing down what I've done. Finally, it also lets you track for the year. So how many miles did I run in 2018? How many miles did I paddle in 2018? Etc. I can find all of that out here. Now, there are limits to these calendars. There's only so much that I can put on this. For example, my runs, I would put the distance and my minutes per mile, and then my cumulative runs for the year. Same with using the ergometer. But I can't put everything on here. So that's where this comes in. This is my interval book, and it simply lists all of my intervals going back years in some cases for every workout that I've done. So 5K time trials were my times on the ergometer and in the boat. Mile repeats are in here. 1 minute on, 1 minute off. And I can break it down to how many meters did I do on which rep on which day. Why? Why do we care about this? Well, this sort of record is fantastic because it can tell me, for example, with 3x5s, 5-minute intervals, that if I do, say, 1,000 meters in 5 minutes, that might be doing really well or really poorly. You also will tend to remember averages. So maybe in reality, one of your, I'm just going to grab one randomly here, maybe one of your 3x5 minute sets, you did 1,058 meters. But the rest of them were around 1,030. The reason you keep this is that tells you the next time you get on, okay, this is the PR that I'm trying to beat. It gets you to think about the PR and more accurately what you did the last time. If you're just going from memory, you're going to tend to go down towards the average rather than focusing on constant improvement. So this helps that. It's also great to look back. So my very first set of 3x5 minutes, my very first rep of that, I didn't hit 1,000 meters. I did 985, 966, 975. I didn't even break 100 watts in that first one, and that would have been 3-4 years ago. And then I can follow that all the way through to today. And I start a new set of pages for every once in a while. I start a new one this year because things were getting a little complicated. So it's just listed as a training log, and I go from there. Joe Zellner actually does the same thing. And by the way, when I'm on the erg, I'm not writing in the book. I have a very complicated system by which I write everything on an envelope and then keep the envelope until I can put it in the book. The envelope, of course, tells me the time that it took for that interval, what was my 500-meter split, because on a speed stroke, you get 500-meter split, and then what was my watt average, how many watts was I outputting at the time. And I have these going back years, listing off exactly all those parameters for everything. So that way, hopefully you can see improvement. And if you plateau, you know that you plateau. It's not just a feeling. You don't have to worry about feeling like you're going slower. You can look back and see, okay, I am going slower, or maybe, no, actually, that's pretty good. Data is important. In the boat, I will do something very, very similar. Although I kind of keep it a little bit looser record because I don't have the ability to just stop and write everything down easily and that sort of thing. But I have been known to go out with a grease marker and write times on the side of my boat as I go through intervals. And I always record sort of the high average for each session. Is this necessary? No. But it's fantastic to show up to the 340 knowing, hey, I've done 300 miles of running, and I've done 400 miles of paddling, and I've done this, and I've done that, and it builds your confidence. And coming into the 340, you want that confidence. And if you're looking for a sub 50, you also want your training to improve every step along the way.
After all, we're looking to get you to the finish. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, quarrels, qualms, quandaries, curse words, please leave them in the comments below. This is 340 Paddler, hoping that you keep your paddle in the water.